morning and welcome to the BPF and UKPA webinar, Proptech and Covid-19, Surviving or Thriving. I'm Emily Wright, Tech Editor and Head of Special Projects at EG, and this morning we're going to be exploring the current prospects and outlook for Proptech from both a demand and supply side perspective. So should Proptechs be leaning in or leaning out or preparing for lean times? And is now a good time for real estate to be transforming and innovating, always innovating, or tightening belts? So I am delighted to be joined today by an esteemed panel. So if I could welcome them, we're joined by Florin, UK Sales Leader and Team Manager of Datscha, Tanya Samuel, UK Sales Director of Prompto, Bronny Wilson, Regional Head UK and Ireland of Equium, and Edds, Director of Innovation at JLL. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. So let's start off with a broad question. What challenges has COVID-19 presented to Proptech? And this is, that's a broad question, but interestingly, this is one of the first big sharp shock to the system this industry has faced, really, certainly in recent memory. So I'm just wondering, how well prepared is a sector like Proptech prepared for this very sharp shock to the system? I'm going to start with Alex on that.
So the one person who's not in a Proptech, I guess, I'll refer to the others from their own personal experience, but I suppose the pretty obvious point to make is cash, right? And I think depending on where the company might be on its most recent fundraising, if that's indeed how it's raising money, then in a way, I suppose that's probably the biggest determinant as to how well it will be sort of set up and resilient against what is inevitably going to be a tough time, at least in the short term. So probably just purely from I guess a sustaining people, business and operations during this period, a lot of that will come down to just how much cash is in the bank. But I think in terms of the slightly more broader answer to your question, I think what this crisis is showing, and indeed what the expectation and need will be, both now and indeed over the sort of medium term, as real estate gets back moving. I guess the focus on Proptech and the procurement of Proptech by the industry will be much more laser focused as to how that technology or how that service can really support generating value. So I think it might sound obvious, but I think expect far more rigor in the way that the industry is procuring. And I suppose from on the flip side of that, the sort of request and ask to the Proptech sector, or the expectation would be really clear on how your product or service is generating or helping to create value during what is inevitably a tough time.
Thank you very much, Bronny. Same question to you. How's the sector faring?
Look, I can't speak for everyone in Proptech, but specifically for us, it's been a really interesting time. Our business model and our platform is all about building communities and bringing people together in that space. And so we've had to change pretty quickly to deliver remote services. I think the challenge has been in slowing sales. We're still getting a lot of inbound inquiry and a lot of landlords looking at how they can really quickly deploy a communications platform. But the challenge is that there is a lot of pressure from the occupants at this time to reduce service charge and cut back on costs and be really prudent in that area. And so that's the kind of challenge of those landlords that hadn't already put some things in place, cardless access or better indoor air quality or a tenant engagement platform, and now struggling with the desire to do those things and do them quickly, but the pressure that they've got on service charge and having to think, and so I think that's the challenge. And there's landlords we're speaking to that say, look, there's 3 new Proptech platforms that we'd like to launch, and there's just no way we can find budget for all of those. So trying to make those decisions about what's the most critical thing that they can do in this time. And I think coming from our client feedback, that's probably one of the biggest challenges for Proptech.
Thank you very much. And Florin, you were nodding away there, I could see. So presumably you agree with a lot of what Bronny was saying there.
Absolutely, Emily. And I think we need to consider that, take into consideration that there's quite a few PropTech businesses out there, and each one of them are at different maturity stage. And I think we need to be careful when we think about small startups. Probably they will have, exactly as Alex said, problems with their investments. More established PropTech businesses probably will have operational issues, or maybe we'll see that there's going to be a decline in the demand. So I think, you know, it's a combination of both. And at the end of the day, we all know that the real estate is behind every other industry in terms of tech adoption. And if we were to look back in the last 2-3 years, there were so many PropTech businesses, and which made it quite difficult for property companies to kind of choose exactly what they need, or to find out what they need. And now coronavirus, or COVID-19, I think made that even more difficult. So yeah, I think I agree with both Alex and Bronny.
Thank you very much. And finally, Tanya, what are your thoughts on that sort of broad question around how the sector is faring at the moment in these very strange times?
Yeah, so like many of the speakers before me, the challenges that we are seeing are, we do visualization software. So for us, it's been quite, for want of a better word, it's been quite a good experience, because we have had no choice but to elevate with the demand and move quite quickly with the increase in demand for this kind of software. The challenges are surrounding the delays in funding, possibly. But having said that, there are a lot of, there's still quite a lot of interest in funding PropTech businesses. With the industry as a whole, I think people, or the larger companies, will be looking at whether they're doing the PropTech, or whether they're building the PropTech systems in-house, or whether they're outsourcing it to smaller PropTech companies. And one of the challenges that we are having is that we predominantly focused on new build construction sites and development sites. And with those shutting down, it meant that we had to quickly change our business model and look after properties that were actually built through estate agents, and kind of almost go back in our technology a little bit to meet the current demand.
Thank you very much. I forgot to say at the beginning, actually, to all our listeners, or rather audience, please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. I'll be keeping an eye on them. If there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen where you can just click in and send a question through. So you can either send it to me privately or to the panel, and we'd be delighted to get on to asking some of those as we reach the end of the session. So yeah, feel free. I'm going to throw in a question that we haven't discussed, which is always great fun for panelists when a chair does that. But it was just something off the back of, Tanya, what you said, and it's a really interesting point. COVID-19 would not have been the path to success anybody would have wished for. You know, obviously it's been a very difficult time for everybody, but you know, there have been and there will be companies that fare comparably better as a result than others, and you know, it all depends on the type of offering. It also depends a lot on, you know, what state the business was in before we went into this situation. I'm just interested to find out if there's evidence of any particular types of companies, particular types of offering, particular types of technology that look set to fare relatively well. And I know there are some obvious ones we could talk about, you know, hands-free technology, touchless technology, but is there anything else out there that you're thinking that could be an interesting time for that particular business? I'm going to ask Florin first on that one. I hope you don't mind.
No. Well, I think the way going forward will be for traditional real estate companies to cooperate with PropTech in ways of which they can democratize their data. We see now that a lot of companies, and this is my personal view, I think I see a lot of companies and institutional investors and agents with international presence. They sit on a humongous silos of data that can be collected, data that can be cleaned, could be aggregated and matched with publicly available data. So I think this will create some internal, and by the way, this should be done by Proptech companies, which, and I'm sure there are some out there. And imagine this will create a very powerful internal data property software, which will be bespoke to your needs, bespoke to your investment criteria. Imagine an agent being able to visualize their colleagues' data from all over the world, or an institutional investor. And I think this is where we could see some synergies going in the future.
Thank you very much, Alex. What are your thoughts on that? You know, you have an umbrella view of the industry.
That's a big question, big answer. I think there's some pretty obvious ones, right? Particularly as from a building specific level, which you kind of touched on, as to how do we get people back into buildings and the technologies that are going to support that. And you know, we're seeing some interesting stuff with clients in Asia, particularly around things like, you know, thermal scans and things like that. But the question mark here is, you know, is that kind of technology allowed from a regulatory perspective in Europe, but also more importantly, is it culturally accepted, and will it be culturally accepted? So I think it's almost too difficult to say, you know, what will be expected and also what will sort of stand the test of time as appropriate kind of safety and security measures. But I think there will be an increased expectation by the occupier, and generally by people using spaces, to see that space is being maintained to a higher quality. Now that can kind of be interpreted in many ways, whether that's cleaning, maybe, and that will be at the height of everyone's mind right now. But I think things like air quality, generally sort of wellness and well-being, and I think that agenda, which was already on the rise, will only continue to accelerate. And I think that kind of goes dovetail with sort of corporate responsibility on both the occupier and the landlord side. And so I think generally just a sort of acceleration in interest and growth of what it means to be a good quality building, or what it means to be a good quality employer within a building. Obviously, there are loads of standards, technologies, and solutions that support that. I think maybe just, you know, one other point I'd make, which kind of touches on something Florin was saying, but I think from a real estate owner perspective, a landlord, portfolio landlord specifically, maybe not immediately, because clearly immediately it's very tactical, it's going to be asset by asset driven. But I think when they start to think about strategically, what are the implications of how do we reimagine what our portfolios are going to look like as a consequence of this, you know, 6, 12, 24 months after, then I do think, you know, picking up on the point, getting more access to the information that they perhaps had already, but didn't really use it in the way to understand which of my buildings is being used for what purpose, but to understand that in a far quicker, more dynamic way. Clearly, you know, the big word of data is in there, but I think just starting to help portfolio owners, asset managers understand what spaces they have available, where perhaps there's untapped value in those spaces. What are the occupiers asking for? What are they saying? How much do they like the space? What are they not using? So I think, you know, communication between landlord and tenant has to increase. And obviously there are some tools that help that, both but at a tactical level, but I think at a strategic level. So how does a landlord engage with a big brand about how it's using its space? And then obviously, you know, lease lengths and, you know, occupancy, utilization of spaces, etc. So I think generally just being a bit more tuned in with how is my space being used. And I think there will be that's something that we've obviously seen an interest in, and everyone's saying that's a nice to have, and there's all this data and we should use it. But I think needs must now, and that, you know, that there will be so much value which has been lost that needs to be, you know, clawed back. And I think that they will be more aggressive in how they seek to use those spaces that they have to exhaust value from them.
Thank you very much. Bronny, you are nodding along with a lot of what Alex was saying there,
Yes.
which is understandable.
So many great points there, Alex. Yeah, I think data is going to be huge. We see it in the space that we're in at the moment. Landlords are really getting very low gauge at the moment on when people do start transitioning back, how many people that will be, what they can expect from each of their occupiers. They currently can't tell, you know, for their occupiers, what percentage of their staff have been furloughed. You know, there's a whole lot of data that's just really missing. They're flying a little blind at the moment. But I think data for everything around occupier enjoyment of that space. I think sustainability is going to be a huge one, obviously starting with indoor air quality monitoring and reporting and transparency in that place. But I think that's going to flow in to be more transparent about energy usage and water usage and waste management and all of those things. Being able to have dashboards that integrate all of those things. So not just key facilities managers have access to that data, but anybody working in that space can from home see what the air quality in their building is like, see how many people on average are working there. And return to work isn't going to go away anytime soon. I saw a survey yesterday that said 76% of people surveyed said that their preference would be to work 2 or more days a week from home in an ongoing basis. And I think, landlords are going to have to think very carefully about how they curate their space so that it is a magnetic space, so that people will continue to choose to come into that office, and that's the direction we're going, is that people will have far more choice when and where they work. So I think, technology that helps landlords to be able to deliver really exceptional spaces for people to work in, managing amenity space, and creating environments that people genuinely want to come to is how they're going to survive long term.
Thank you very much. So we've touched there on, as I say, it's not the path to success anybody would have wished for, but, that out of all adversity, there are opportunities, and it's important to focus on that too, because otherwise it all does get rather depressing. But, even for the companies that, look to potentially fare well, and certainly for those who are struggling, this is a very difficult time. It's a difficult time for lots of businesses, and Proptech is no exception. So before we move on to talk about some of the wider issues, let's just talk a bit about the support that there is out there for the industry. Is there enough? Should government be doing more? Obviously, the Future Fund, which is open to UK companies or innovative UK companies who can attract investment, matching the fund from third-party investors who've previously raised at least 250k in equity from third-party investors over the last 5 years. That comes online this month. Is that enough? Is there enough out there? I mean, big businesses obviously have their struggles. When it comes to Proptech or any kind of entrepreneurial industry, there are other pressures. You've invested so much in what you're doing, often personally. There's a lot of pressure. Founders particularly are really feeling the pressure. So is there enough support out there? And what more can be done? So Tanya, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, so I just want to quickly jump back into the previous question, because I think that's maybe just a bit more relevant, and I'll explain why. So in terms of going forward and the needs and what Alex and Bronny had said previously, we're seeing a huge demand in configurator tools. So that is making homes a little bit more convenient for workplaces and stuff like that. So I think that's going to be quite huge. Going back to the current question, in terms of the Futures Fund and the funding available in the UK, as a startup, we wouldn't really want to be borrowing money at this stage, just because I think longer term it wouldn't look as healthy as a company that has got organic growth. And luckily for us, we are a business that is seeing quite great organic growth, being that we're a European company who have only just set up in the UK. It's not something that we would personally be looking for.
Okay, thank you very much. Florin, what are your thoughts on the support out there for the industry, either in terms of how you feel about the support available, or how you feel about the pressures that the industry is facing due to the entrepreneurial nature of it?
I think it's encouraging that the government responded to this significant pressure to provide financial support and to boost this startup ecosystem. We at Datscha, we don't really need funding, and that's good. But based on, I think there's been some disappointment from the community that many dynamic and I think fast-growing businesses won't be in a position to take advantage of this initiative based on what you said, because one, they won't qualify or they won't be able to secure the private much funding required. But fundamentally, I think we need to understand that the primary purpose of the fund is to extend the runway for existing businesses, not to fund new startups. So this is really for businesses with relatively good track record, and not all startups, you know. So yeah, that's my point.
Thank you very much. Alex, what are your thoughts? I mean, obviously you can see this from the perspective of working as part of a large organisation, but also having, as I said, that overarching view of a lot of what's going on in the Proptech sector as well, due to your role. So what do you think about the level of support that has been offered sort of across the board, and for smaller companies as well as larger companies?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing to say is, right, every company out there, large and small, is looking for help right now. So, you know, it's not just for startups that the government have stepped in. They've stepped in to support every company in the entire economy, because the economy's, you know, having a bad time. So I don't think it's necessarily, you know, singling out Proptech, you know, in terms of needing support. You know, that clearly the entire industry, and if we think about real estate, the whole industry is, you know, has looked for support. And you know, and that's inevitable. I think in terms of specifically around, you know, the community, I mean, obviously it's great that you know, the UK government has stepped in to support what is a key part of our, particularly for real estate, but I think more generally sort of technology, a key part of our economy. So I think that's really good to see. I think the reality though is clearly, you know, again, back to my first point, depending on timing, whether that's enough, you know, it will be inevitable that there will be some winners and losers through this, and that's, you know, that's the reality of the situation. It's a bit too difficult to sort of crystal ball gaze exactly who and where that will happen, I suppose. And it comes to a question that's been asked in the Q&A around the sort of, rather than cost saving, focus on value. And again, you know, yes, obviously that's what you want to be able to do, but the reality is, and you know, I can say this from conversations with clients, is, you know, at the moment it's incredibly difficult to justify anything that isn't deemed to be either cost saving or business critical. So as much as your product or service can seek to be offering additional value, it's just very difficult to get the individuals and the business people's views to sort of actually accept and engage that conversation. So, you know, I'm maybe slightly deviating from your question, but I think they go sort of hand in hand as to what do we need to support the Proptech industry. Clearly there's a sort of short-term mechanism which hopefully the government has stepped into, but I think the most immediate thing as we sort of come out of it is how do we align the needs with the solutions? And I do think that, you know, which is probably a slightly bigger question for another time, but I think there is still a massive missing link in real estate between problem and solution. There's a lot of solutions out there without a problem, and likewise there are a lot of problems that haven't found a solution, and we haven't yet created a mechanism to bring those two together. And I do wonder whether, and it's something that I think about a lot, whether this will give us the kind of impetus to better match you know, supply and demand between, you know, those good great products that are out there, and finding a market for them very quickly, which ultimately is revenue, which is, I'm sure, what any tech company would want rather than a handout.
I mean, I think we can touch on that just briefly, because it's an excellent point. I mean, this, you know, the problem and the solution problem, if you like, you know, could this, as you say, it could be an impetus, but now we really do have a problem. You know, everybody has a problem, and that big problem has sort of forced us to look at where the other problems and where those solutions might be. And we've seen some examples of definite fast tracking of technology where people for a while have been, why would I, yeah, I mean, it sounds great, but my business is fine, and why would I overhaul everything just for that? And, you know, now we're in situations where having something, a system in place where you can keep an eye on what's happening in your portfolio without being there would be really helpful right now. So people who do have that are in a much better position. So do you think, you know, I mean, I know, Alex, you said it could be an impetus, but I'm interested to see if the other panelists think that this could be a bit of a catalyst to really get everybody thinking much more seriously about their problems and solutions. Again, it's a question that we hadn't discussed, but I think it's quite an interesting one to address. So Bronny, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of problems that we're trying to solve with individual Proptech solutions, but over the last year, what I've heard from pretty much every panel and round table that I've been involved with from the landlord and agent side has been that Proptechs need to be integrating and they need to be working together to solve solutions together. There needs to be some consolidation. And I think, you know, this process that we're going through with COVID now is accelerating a lot of things that are already happening in the industry. And I think that that piece of Proptech companies working together to solve problems and pulling data from various sources and dashboarding in one platform, and really working with the landlord base to figure out what systems need to be talking to each other and how we're going to make that happen. And I see that happening, and it's happening pretty quickly.
Thank you very much. Florin, what are your thoughts?
I think I completely agree with Alex and Bronny. There are a lot of solutions out there that actually don't solve anything. But if we were to come back to your question, well, let's analyze two different sectors: the investment side and the property management side. Property management side, you know, look at the things now. Buildings, whether they're temporarily closed or they're permanently unoccupied, can be at a greater risk from things like, I don't know, arson, antisocial behavior, vandalism, squatters, theft, so on and so forth. So I think there could be some new Proptechs could come around and help protect against electrical fire, guard against the escape of water losses or against arson. On the investment side, you can't really drive around to inspect properties nowadays, or even you can't even drive around to identify opportunities. Therefore, desk assessment will need to be undertaken. So you will need as much reliable data as possible. You know, a lot of real estate companies are changing their strategy. You know, we're seeing a lot of our clients now are looking to identify owner-occupied properties, for example. So, you know, what kind of Proptech, what kind of data can you use to identify those opportunities? Funds are refocusing their UK strategy. You know, they're looking, for example, they're coming towards London, and this is it's particularly the case in the office sector, given the occupational demand. So, what kind of tech can we use to identify those opportunities? So, yeah, I think we will see a lot of good Proptech that will actually solve a need. Not that there aren't out there, there are quite a few, but I think we will see quite new businesses coming around.
Thank you. And that leads nicely on to the next question, which is around sort of are there any temporary needs among clients that have manifested as a result of COVID-19, and how can Proptech companies step in or step up to help with that? And I suppose the second part of that question is, will those temporary needs become more permanent, or are there some situations where it's just for the short term? So Bronny, let's go to you on that, and then Tanya, I see your back, so we'll come to you too, but let's start with Bronny.
Yeah, look, I think there are some temporary needs. I mean, one of the key ones that everyone's talking about is thermal testing. And the question is it needed? Will it work in the UK to the point made previously? And how long will it be needed for? And, you know, it's a challenge for landlords at the moment, looking to how quickly can we start bringing people back into buildings and showing that those buildings are safe. But, you know, it's expensive technology to invest in, and you need resources to be able to manage it. You know, I think visitor access and cardless access are becoming big talking points as well. And for a lot of the clients we've spoken to, that's really at the top of the list, because while it has an immediate need, it's something that they've already been looking at. There's huge ongoing value, and they see a huge value in investing in it now.
Thank you very much. And Tanya, your thoughts on that? Any sort of temporary needs that Proptech can step up and, you know, address and tackle head on?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the biggest things with lockdown was that all of a sudden we were unable to do viewings and access these properties. Construction sites had kind of shut down and nobody really knew what to do. So we were able to quite quickly step in and provide a solution for that. So whilst prior to the lockdown, I think the understanding was that real estate companies and tech companies weren't communicating as well, and there was a kind of feeling that they weren't ready as yet. But they had no choice but to be ready. So what happened is that everything moved quite quickly, which was quite nice in terms of, well, I don't want it to sound positive, because obviously we're going through a worldwide pandemic, but in reality, when this did happen, there were companies that did have tech that was able to quickly step in and support the real estate industry, which was nice. The longer term effects are going to be, again, going around configuring and making your home space a bit more comfortable. So there's going to be hygiene factors in that and health factors. It would be interesting to see maybe the use of more materials that repel bacteria and things like that, and smart services. But yeah, I think long term, for us, it's going to be technology used around making that work-life home space a little bit more easier to live in and be in.
Alex, I wanted to ask you the same question, if that's okay, again, to get that umbrella view.
In terms of, you know, the next sort of 3-6 months, as we all kind of figure out what we want, clearly there's going to be an element of making this up as we go along. And I think, you know, what I would say from a priority, this is probably true for both occupant and landlord, but if you think about from the landlord perspective, what are your priorities over the next 3 to 6 months? I would say in big, bold letters, communication. How are you communicating with your occupiers coming back into the building, and what do they want? What's their strategy for reusing the space? What do they want and how they're going to use it? And then I think ongoing communication with what you're doing to support them in their business. So I think communication is absolutely vital. You know, other things we talked about. So, you know, I think the need, literally overnight, FM teams having to relearn how to remotely manage buildings and looking to what perhaps was, you know, growing trend anyway, but having to accelerate things like smart tech, you know, smart remote monitoring, maybe even getting your buildings automatable, or at least automation ready. Air quality, well-being, sustainability, we talked about that. I think in terms of the trends that we're likely to see continue, well, I hope that the communication piece sticks, right? So if that communication has worked well during the next sort of 6 to 12 months, one would like to see that continue, and therefore being a far more dynamic relationship between landlord and occupier to support that kind of more service-driven, which we've all talked about for a few years now. How do landlords become more service-oriented? And I think, you know, linked to that is the journey of the individual or the consumer, effectively, whether it's a retail store, whether it's a residential, whether it's, you know, whatever asset class it is. Who's using it? How are they using it? And does the manager and the owner understand how people are using their spaces? And again, that comes back to some of the, you know, data and technologies that support that, but actually then the skill set to sort of understand that and interpret that into value. And again, I think, you know, some of those things could help both landlord and occupier through the next sort of 6 to 12 months when we have to abide by certain rules. But actually the precedent of that should, I think, create additional value and create a better product on both sides of the table.
Thank you very much. Thank you. One of the questions that I wanted to ask, I think I can kind of get a sense of what you guys are thinking on it, is whether Proptech should be leaning in or leaning out of a crisis. It feels to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that leaning in is probably the way forward. But as I say, you guys might feel differently. I'm just sort of assuming based on the things that you've said so far. But Florin, what's your thoughts? Should the industry be leaning in or leaning out?
Well, when we look about, much has been written about how COVID-19 will reshape the travel industry, the tourism industry, but less has been said in the past. Now it's coming more. Less has been said about how the real estate industry will be reshaped. And I think this sector plays a far greater role in the global economy. Therefore, I believe this is the time when real estate firms, together with tech firms, should lean in.
Thank you very much. Bronny? Yeah, 100%. I think it's just such an important time for Proptech to be supporting the landlords and built environment with finding solutions, but also being very flexible and adaptable with pricing, with service models, with contracts. You know, at the moment, it's, you know, we know it's a challenge for people, as we mentioned before, rolling out new technology in a time when they're trying to reduce outgoings. And, you know, one of the things we've done is offered a really low price point entry where we can deploy and deliver an engagement platform within 48 hours. People don't need to make a rush decision now about what their longer term strategy is, but knowing that they'll have the tools that they need. So I think, being adaptable, but really listening. Over the last couple of weeks, I've spent a good part of my day, every day, on calls with each of our clients, on really what their challenges are in this period, but what they expect the challenges to be in the coming months, in the next 12 months, and really working with them to understand how we can help with those challenges. Of course, we already do all of the occupier communication and engagement. We cover a lot of health and well-being, which is critical, but also looking at how they're going to manage facilities. What are they going to do with their shower and bike space amenity? Do they need 15-minute booking for the shower so people can guarantee that they're the only person using that facility in a period of time? We've been interviewing and surveying the occupants, the HR, the office managers, and also all of the users across our platform. And there's changes between what the landlord thinks is going to happen and what the occupant and the end user thinks is going to happen. And I think use of those facilities, like wellness facilities, is one of those things. People are saying from the occupant side, we will be looking to have people that can ride to work doing so, those people that can get to the office without being in congested public transport. But on the other hand, we have landlords saying we don't know how to open those amenities safely. So it's working on those problems one by one with landlords and figuring out how can our tech platform help to support those challenges.
Thank you very much. Tanya, same question to you. Lean in or lean out?
Yeah, so definitely lean in. The real estate industry has typically been at the bottom of the kind of scale as far as the adoption of technology, and going through the pandemic has kind of obviously sped that up and helped to kind of speed up that transition, if you like. Things like online meetings are now the new normal, where people are absolutely having to work remotely, and now within the industry they're having to view and do property transactions remotely online, as well as e-signatures. And we kind of have to look at almost the fintech industry. So prior to when the finance industry crashed in 2008, there wasn't much adoption. It was on the way, but they had to quickly adopt a lot of technology to kind of rise on that. So I think that we're kind of experiencing the same trajectory there. So if we kind of look at that example, then it's definitely a time to lean in.
Thank you very much. And then I want to ask Alex, I've asked everybody that question. So same question to you. And Tanya mentioned fintech there, and I just wondered from your perspective, are there anything that we can be learning from, any situations where there's been anything similar to this in the past, or any other sectors that we could be learning from at the moment?
Thanks for that. I guess I would just say, and I'm not going to repeat, but I do think, so I would encourage, and yes, I agree with the sort of lean in versus lean out. However, and it is a big however, and big clients and colleagues around who ultimately control budgets and procure these solutions, it's a rough ride, right? And by leaning in and just being close to your client doesn't always mean you're going to translate that into a sale, because literally they can't justify any expense. So as much as I think it is an important time, and it's really important that customer and client are speaking and aligning product and service. That isn't always going to manifest itself into a sale in the short term. I think per Bronny's point, by getting close and offering help and assistance and being flexible to your commercial arrangements as much as you can be, will really help cement a solid relationship between two parties, as that's inevitable, and history precedent for that. And I think that will then serve you well to support as times improve. They will come to you and say, well, actually, how can you help me do this next thing, this next thing, this next thing? So I think probably says it's probably pretty obvious, but I think in terms of lean in, yes, but accept that it isn't going to work in all cases. You're going to be facing a very difficult customer base who have got a lot of other priorities on at the moment. So, it is challenging, as much as it is challenging for us and as much as it is challenging for our clients. So I think that's probably just a word of caution. And then to your point, yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with the point around, the financial sector. It's often the sector that I look at as the most comparable in terms of, maybe us following on behind them a little bit as to what trends are going to manifest. And one thing which, per my point before, something which the financial industry generally does a lot better now, when I've sort of been trying to map its history to figure out when we might expect it, is most big banks now will have accelerators, will have startup incubators, and will have a whole team dedicated to working with that sector to support and grow, those technology businesses. We don't really have that in real estate. Yes, we've got VC-backed accelerators and things like that, but not many of the actual real estate operators get their hands dirty in that space. And so I think, coming back to my point before about closing the gap between supply and demand, what I would like to see, and again, it's going to be challenging in the short term, but is for the real estate community to properly mobilize a better mechanism to match supply and demand. And there's lots of ways that we could do that. And I think some of the fintech kind of mechanisms that they use could be an interesting model for us to look to.
Great, thank you very much. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to come back at the end just to ask the panelists some final thoughts around what we've been discussing. But before we do that, let's go to some questions. So people have been asking questions both to the Q&A and to the chat function. I can't have both open at once, so if you could ask any questions you've got via the Q&A, that would be great. So there's been quite a bit around heat sensors, actually. There's someone here who said less of a question, more of a statement. I agree with Alex, and the heat sensors and a form of health security check will alienate occupiers. Will people be asked to leave if they fail the test? I'd rather stay and work from home than go through airport security at the office. So that's an interesting one. And then there's one here, agree that we should be transparent with data. What happens if, for example, the air quality test shows the air quality is below WHO levels or whatever levels they might be? How would you deal with this result with the tenants? Does anybody want to take that one? It's, I suspect it's a bit of a difficult one to answer at this point, but I mean, I certainly couldn't answer it. Alex.
I'm glad it came up because it's funny, and it's kind of, I suppose, indicative, right, of we have to kind of wait for a crisis to sometimes to catalyze things. But that kind of question has been something that has been mooted around on the sustainability front for about 15 years. So at what point will an occupier demand that the building has to deliver a certain kind of efficiency or carbon footprint type rating, and what will happen if the building can't deliver that? And that's kind of been something which the sustainability community has been pushing for a while. And actually this is just an extension of that. So if the demand is there and the requirement is there by the occupant for a certain standard, needs to deliver that, needs to be able to deliver it. And I think, I've said for a while now, I think the time will come when a large occupier will, in the lease and in the RFP requirements for a space, actually detail out, okay, I want this building to demonstrate how it will support me and my staff meet certain HR goals, productivity goals, well-being goals, whatever it might be. And I want quantifiable evidence that it's doing that. We're not quite there yet in terms of the measurement and monitoring of it, but we're very close. And I think that day will come quite soon. And I think perhaps what this crisis has done is accelerate that conversation. And obviously it'll probably be needlepoint on, air quality around particularly, certain criteria around air quality and well-being. But actually, I think the point is more generic, which is, yes, there is a sort of break in the chain, which needs to be addressed. And I think that will only come through, again, proper communication, proper engagement, but then actually having the evidence to it. And ultimately, if it's in the lease, then there's value attached to it. And then that's when things move.
Thank you very much. Great answer. Does anybody else have anything to add on that point? We've got lots of questions that have come through, so no problem if not. Okay, so what do the panelists think the appetite is from institutional lenders and funders for the use of Proptech? I regularly work with institutional lenders in the context of development finance, and I get the impression they're still reluctant to use technology either due to security concerns or because cloud data storage is often overseas. Anybody got any thoughts on that? The appetite from institutional lenders and funders for the use of Proptech? Otherwise, I'll pick someone.
I think I get it. I'll take this one. We actually, at Datscha, we do have a few institutional lenders and funders using our product. And I think it depends what service you are selling. If you are selling an aggregator of data, I don't think that should be a problem, because probably you're pulling out reliable, publicly available data, and all you sell a platform that will save them time. So they could get that data elsewhere, but it will take them probably longer. It won't be cost effective. So in that respect, I don't see a problem. If you are selling a Proptech whereby they need to give you their data, I think that's a different question, because you'll have to show that you have to show your securities, and there's some certain standards that you need to comply with. So I think depends what solution you're going to sell. To go to the short answer, yes, I think you can sell Proptech to lenders.
Thank you very much. There's a question here that I'm interested to hear from Tanya and Bronny on, because we were talking about temporary measures. So do you feel that the temporary investment needed to aid the sector is worth spending money on when they're quite costly and only temporary?
Yeah, I don't mind going for that. So I think that there is going to be an implementation period for Proptech, right? So there's going to be winners and losers in this. There's going to be some people and some Proptech businesses that completely thrive and go on an upward scale. But because of the adoption and the way that the speed of it being adopted, there is going to be an implementation, and we will have to prove that the Proptech does solve a problem and that it does work, right? For a lot of these companies. So relating it to my own business, being that it is a visualization tool as opposed to a data-driven tool, we do have sales enablement and data in the back of that. So it's aimed at streamlining the sales process. So, and being that I was an estate agent for over 20 years as well, I understand the user side of it as well as the Proptech side of it. So I understand that there is going to be a need to prove to me as a real estate company that this is going to be better than the system that I already have in place. What we find in the UK is that we have always, and we always will have, a lot of movement in the real estate industry. So there's businesses that are thriving and selling more houses during this lockdown, and there's businesses that aren't doing so great. So we're going to have to prove, a lot of Proptech companies are going to have to prove that this works and that this is something that is going to benefit in the long term.
And I think, you know, just following on from that, there's a piece around the occupier demands, and I don't think we've seen really what that's going to look like in the UK yet. You know, we're starting to see through our clients, occupiers, you know, putting in requests, this is what we would like to see. And I think most landlords are waiting to see what the government guidance looks like and the types of things that their occupiers are asking for. And if there's enough pressure from the occupier side to have indoor air quality transparency and reporting, or thermal testing to come into the building, then I think they're really going to have no choice but to start exploring how to engage the technology to deliver on that.
Thank you very much. A question here about whether the panel thinks that trends will take us towards, in terms of virtual reality viewings, for the purchase of commercial and development property. So that's sort of a step further, viewings for purchase. Does anybody want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. So as I said previously, we've seen quite a huge increase in terms of companies looking for software that allows them to view remotely, especially with international buyers and international investors, and having a whole process. So we've adapted a number of our packages to kind of suit the market. So whether it's building completely in 3D, using CGIs to replicate a like-for-like simulation of a property in a viewing, we have this option. We also have the 3D walkthroughs, as you'll see many of the estate agents doing at the moment. Is it something that is going to be adopted for the long term? More than likely. I think, again, there will be an implementation period where if people are seeing that this works, then why would they do a day of window shopping viewings, for example, when they can streamline that process, and by the time somebody comes to view your property, they're quite heavily engaged in that particular unit or that particular property. So I think that's it's going to be adopted. It's just how quickly and how much is adopted into the market.
Thank you very much. This is a question, well, for everybody really, but let's start with Florin and then go to Alex on this one. Is it a good thing that a number of startups will go bust? Less competition, less noise, more capital to bigger Proptechs?
Oh, that's a tough one to answer. Is it a good thing that startups will go bust? No, I don't think that's a good thing that startups will go bust, as you can imagine. And I feel for our colleagues that will experience this. More capital, I think there wasn't a problem of capital. I mean, I think capital will always be there. And if you have a good product, if you have a good, as Alex said earlier, a product that actually solves the need, with all the competition in the world, you will still benefit of that funding. So no, I don't think there's a good thing companies will go bust.
Alex, same question to you.
I guess, being brutally honest, every economic cycle will have winners and losers, right? And with the emergence of any new sector, which is Proptech, there are inevitably going to be good products. There are going to be products that don't necessarily, fit the need. And so whether or not this crisis had come or not, there were already going to be winners and losers. And there was likely to be consolidation, M&A, etc. within the tech sector. I think perhaps what this crisis and previous crises do is they accelerate that. And so clearly for those that are not able, and perhaps some of that is down to luck, per my point before around timing of investment. But if their product was not the right fit for the market, then they're going to find it really tough. So I suppose, it's perhaps a bit more of a, I don't know, I obviously completely feel for companies that would go bust and for the individuals involved, but fundamentally, this happens in every sector, in every economy, and it has done over time. So all we're seeing perhaps is an acceleration of that. And I guess, per my very first point, what I still think is missing is a really clear match between value prop and problems to be solved. And there, I can tell you, because I've met a lot in my 5 years doing this job, there's a lot of products out there that don't really fit the problem, and not necessarily fit the problem, but it's about how they commercialize that and how do they expect to, for that product to be valued and for that product to be bought and used. And there isn't really that synergy between client and supplier. And I think that's often the reason why, why there's a challenge in procurement for these. So, but, it's a harsh lesson, I'm sure. And I feel for anyone that's going through it. But I think it's an inevitable, I guess, consequence when times get tough. There will be winners and losers. Sorry, that's probably a bit of a long-winded answer.
Can I just jump in? Because I actually do believe that crisis is almost like a natural selection to companies that will survive and won't survive. Going bust is bad, but there's a lot of money in the industry as a whole. And I think if your product, there's a lot of money in the industry. Unfortunately, some people will go bust, but the technology is still very viable. So it does depend on a number of external factors, whether it's funding or the dynamic positioning around it. But ultimately, the technology is still there, required, and quite innovative for the market.
I just say it's worth saying this is not just for tech companies, right? Every company of every size, shape, going through a similar, and there will be established real estate or established companies that will not be around post this crisis. So it isn't just a specific problem for tech.
I think on the positive, sorry, just quickly, there's a big space for innovation at the moment and actually turning it on its head.
I hope so.
Thank you very much. Good to end on a positive there. Space for innovation. But you know, it's not just tech companies, and it's more of a statement, than a question, but a statement being sent through, which is worth discussing. I think from a landlord point of view, and unlike in a traditional recession, they have to invest. Unless they can prove to occupiers that their offices are safe and healthy, no one will return. What are the panel's thoughts on that?
100%. I think having clear, transparent communication with occupants is just an absolute critical piece of this return to office phase. And, you know, those landlords that have already invested in that space are fine.
Yeah.
Communicate with their occupants and are already starting to communicate what they're doing to support that transition back into the workplace.
Thank you very much. We've got 2 minutes left. I mean, that was a great question, but I think we're going to have to sort of move quite quickly just to be able to finish off some last questions and close as well. There's a question here that's come through purely for Alex. Are companies like JLL using this as an opportunity to acquire distressed technology companies, Alex?
Well, I'll try and be really quick. I mean, every crisis offers opportunity, right? So yes, we've got a VC fund, and we've got a technology structure now, so I'm sure the guys and girls running that are looking for opportunities, but like I said, times are tough, so making that justification is not easy, but yeah, I suppose always on the lookout for opportunities.
Thank you. We've had an amazing number of questions through, like really great and so brilliant to see so many people engaged. So thank you so much. We've got about a minute and a half left. So there are some questions there around, you know, advice for Proptech companies that are struggling to raise investment, and some stuff as well around, you know, the high-end sector. And I'm sure that there'll be opportunities somehow. I don't know how. I'm sort of maybe setting the BPF and UKPA up for extra work here, that we can, you know, put people in touch and have those questions answered. There's no networking or coffee after this, which makes it more difficult. But I just wanted to close in the last minute just to ask a question around mental health. Actually, I think it's a tough time for everybody, whether you are working in a big company, a small company, in property, in finance, in, you know, retail, whatever you're doing, it's a difficult time. We mentioned earlier that for the Proptech sector, or any sort of sector where there's lots of founders and entrepreneurs, there's a lot of pressure. What are your thoughts on how people can look after their mental health at this time, whether or not the business is, you know, looking like it might fare relatively well or not? And I know that this, again, was not something that we discussed talking about, but I think it's important. Last week was a bit of a tough one for lots of people. I think it just got to that point where, you know, lockdown just felt like it had really been going on for quite some time now. So Bronny, let's start with you, and we probably got about a minute left, so we'll quickly move around the panel.
Yeah, I think, you know, health and wellness for occupants has always been, I think, something that landlords need to be focusing on, but now more than ever. And while we have developed, you know, a whole new way of working from home, there are things like Zoom fatigue and, you know, things you discussed, Emily, that I think can't be overlooked. And it's going to be so important as people come back into buildings to find ways that people can still get that community experience.
Thank you. Florin.
We all should look ahead and be positive and exercise as much as we can during these tough times. And there's not much we can do, I suppose. It is what it is, and I think positiveness will prevail.
Thank you. And Tanya?
I think fundamentally it's about being kind to yourself, and being kind to others around you. What you'll find is a lot of people are homeschooling as well as working, and probably working a lot harder than they would be if they were going to the office and taking less breaks. Just take it back, be kind to yourself, take these breaks. And I think that's the most important thing for mental health. Thank you.
And finally, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. I think maybe just on a personal note, I bought a puppy just before lockdown. I'm very glad that I did, because she's kept me sane and happy. And, you know, I'm probably going to be in this situation or this working environment for the foreseeable future. It's going to be months, I'm sure. You know, that's been you know, one of the things that I've used, and whether or not bringing dog to work day will ever happen in my office, I don't know, but definitely helped me.
There you have it. Be kind to yourself, and if in doubt, buy a puppy. So that seems to be, that's great advice, and what a lovely note to end on. You know, it's great to all come together to talk about the business and the industry, but ultimately it's about people, and these are tough times. So thank you so much to our panelists for that last question, brilliantly answered. Thank you so much, and see you again soon.